Welcome to the Cannacurio Podcast, powered by Cannabis Media. I'm your host, Ed Keating, and on today's show, we're joined by Brett Puffenbarger, the VP of Marketing at Greenleaf Business Solutions. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Ed. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. So you're the first guy who's ever come with a calling card that says "From Bong to Boardroom." So tell me how you came up with that, because it's quite a unique calling statement.
You know, I don't know. It was one of those things where, so I came to cannabis in what I kind of call the transplant era. So it was the early adopters, but not the early adopters, right? So like the first group that jumped over after they weren't afraid helicopters were going to show up. Specifically, I'm an East Coaster, so I was down in Florida at the time. I was working at Harley Davidson. I jumped into cannabis then. And I think that's a specific era, right? If you look at the eras of cannabis and how it's grown, the East Coast kind of set off a chain reaction of MSO states and some other stuff, right? We can see it. It's pretty clear. So that's where I was at when I jumped into cannabis. So I came from it. I came into cannabis that way.
Excellent. So, and in terms of your background, for what you shared, on PR, marketing, business development, brand cultivation. So is it really covering, most of the marketing mix, all the marketing mix, any nuances there?
Yeah. So I'm a marketing ops guy at heart. So that can kind of get us back to the original question too of the bong to boardroom part, right? So I wanted to reflect that piece of me, the transition from this kind of operations-minded corporate America guy. Granted, it was Harley Davidson, right? Like I was at Harley Davidson, so this isn't like corporate America, right? Like I'm not on Wall Street. It was jeans and a button down and all of this. So I was at Harley Davidson. I was a director of business development. That doesn't sound like a huge thing, but Harley makes a lot more money off of T-shirts, leather jackets. It's a lot of retail stuff. So I jumped into cannabis retail at an MSO. Me and a dude from Disney building, retail stores, because it's all lifestyle branding, the whole 9 yards. That was the beginning. Went back to school, now doing the PhD thing. So all of that, I think, kind of formed this dual human being who looks like me, and I'm all like, clearly a weed person. But I kind of have the resume of one that would not look like me or talk like me or be into the things I'm into in my regular everyday life outside of work. So I think those kind of things melded into this attempt at a tagline, attempt at, a career of varied, fun, cool, and exciting things. Ta-da! I think that all spells the same stuff, right? It's one.
So tell us a little bit about all the academic work you're doing. Not many people are heading toward a PhD, and what drove you in that direction?
I think I just needed to do it because the rest of it was interesting to me. So I came to college late, right? So I didn't go to college for a bachelor's until after I'd already made the jump into cannabis. So I went back to school as a person who had worked at like a director's level. Like, I had been decently okay building myself up in the regular world before making this jump into cannabis. So I went back to school because I wanted, in my mind, the paperwork, right? I was like, I need the paperwork. So I learned a bunch of skills along the way because I went to a kind of a trade school of sorts, but for like the media arts. So like I went to Full Sail in Florida. They do show production and recording arts and all of that. I went for media communications and I learned how to do all kinds of cool like media marketing kind of utility knife things. That let me jump into cannabis in a different way. Decided I wanted to figure something fun out from that. So I decided to do a master's in public relations. That's actually how I built the whole LinkedIn following thing. That was my master's thesis. So after I did that, now I was like, well, that was really cool. And it like was effective at building a career. So PhD seemed fun. And I'll be candid with you and everybody else, I guess, who's listening. One of my regrets is I did not take my wife's advice. She told me to go get an MBA, and I didn't do it. I specialized in public relations. It turned out okay with the LinkedIn following, which, if I'm being super honest, was also her idea, because she said, hey, you should stop arguing on Facebook. If you're going to argue, you should argue with people who matter, and then it'll get somewhere in the world. So I came to LinkedIn to argue, and I don't know. I guess that's where it all kind of started.
I love that. And yeah, I got the MBA. I don't know if you missed out on much. I think you're doing great work with the path you've chosen. And one of the things that leads me to think it sort of ties into maybe the Harley stuff is in some of your writings, you talk about being a rebel at heart, and you approach the cannabis sector through this notion of radical transparency and a drive to foster change. What the hell does that mean? Like, help me understand that, unpack that.
So I think a lot of people, let me break a couple of those pieces down.
Yeah.
So I think inherently I'm rebellious because of the way my brain works. It's not because I want to be. I think I have been painted that way first before I decided, you know what, I'll just go ahead and embrace it. Harley Davidson, right? Like rebel lifestyle branding, right? Before that, I was a punk rock kid. At one point, I did karate professionally. Like I taught it and did all of that and worked at martial arts schools. And so I've done a lot of interesting, weird things.
Yeah.
Rambled a little bit there. So
that's all right. So in terms of trying to foster genuine change in the industry, what does that mean for you? Or what does it mean for the industry?
I would like to see people be a little more open and honest with the struggles of the industry, but in a little bit less of a hackles up ego sort of way. I think it kind of goes to the tagline too, right? I see both sides of that cannabis world. And I hope I infuse that into the things I say and the companies I work at and all of that. Because one of the reasons I work where I work now, one of the reasons I worked where I've worked in the past is when I first got into cannabis, I was like, I want to take care of patients. Then it was, wait, I love cannabis businesses, because then you can expand your sphere of help, right? How can I be a positive influence, not for patients, because it's whatever, a bud tender, even if I own an MSO, I have a set number of patients and the set number of markets I'm in. If I can help every single one of them get bank accounts and make that little piece easier, if I can help them get payroll services, HR services, if I can help them offer their employees living wages, benefits, all of those things, if I can facilitate the growth of all of it, that to me was taking care of the most amount of people. So that's what I try to think about when I look at every situation in cannabis, right? Like, I think it's safe to say there are a lot of hot button issues, right? Cannabis is an industry full of passion, right? From the early days to now, right? Everybody's passionate. We're here. I think passion a lot of times leads to misunderstandings and miscommunications turning into larger things than they need to be. And I think we need to be able to have conversations and come to common ground, because whether we want to agree on it or not, we're all in the same boat, whether it's like the legacy operators who are mad or anybody else. I said this a long time ago, and it's been a long time since I've done a long form podcast where I could say it again, and then we could talk about it a little bit, because I'd love to hear to see the data breakdown of this one day after we talk through this. I think there's two sides to every coin, and I think the cannabis industry loosely has, the legacy guys and the corporate guys, right? And I think it's important to come to that table realizing that off the rip, and both sides I think are valid, and I've always called them the heart and the head, right? We're going to have the heart to build the brand and the quality and all of those pieces, right? That's what makes it real, and then you got to have the head to figure out the complex web narrative. All the cannabis is nuts. Let's just
Yeah.
I'll stop trying to be wax poetic about it and just call it what it is. It's 39 separate, disparate markets that can't intersect very much, with a patchwork of companies trying to figure it out. And it's startups powering startups on top of startups. Chaos.
True. Yeah, we call them 39 sovereign nations. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And then you start to throw in the international side of it too. So one of the other areas I wanted to dig into, Brett, is you are a multi-firm customer of Cannabis Media. You've used this at a couple places, and one of the questions we're just curious about is, as your teams have used Cannabis Media, how have they used it, and what have the workflows been like at your companies? Because you've been in very different kind of businesses, and what have you learned? Because you're somebody that we can learn from too at Cannabis Media.
They're not different kinds of businesses. They're not. So I think that's the fundamental piece, right? So I'll go back to marketing 101 on this for how I've approached us using you as a tool. And then it'll also explain why they're the same kind of business, right?
Yeah.
So I look at the entire world of building, marketing, everything through buyer personas. I know that that's like fundamental 101, like 4Ps kind of marketing stuff, but I really do. And then I look at us as an organization, as a buyer persona, to then figure out how to use your tool, right? Yeah. So every company I've been at shares a few pieces of the same DNA, right? We already talked about one when we were talking about the heartfelt fun stuff we were talking about a minute ago. Right now we're in the nuts and bolts. So one of the main things you use it for is marketing campaigns, right? So that's a buyer persona. How is it, whatever, how is it affecting marketing campaigns? I think I broke it down in a post the other day.
Yeah, you did.
They're all kind of the same, right? Like each one of those is a buyer persona for you guys, and vice versa, a reason for me to be a champion for it within an organization. Back to the DNA piece, right? All of us are ancillary service providers to cannabis companies who want to target variably specific lists, which is traditionally very difficult to have, right? Like there's only so many options that allow us to even try this in only our sandbox, right? So I think for marketing, it's the email functionality, right? That's your buyer persona. I want to reach the largest audience. For the compliance audience, I think that's the one who's going to be sitting here going, why the heck is this guy doing it? I'm a nerd, y'all, and I like data a lot. And my compliance friends, I love you. And I want you to know that you can use this tool a crap load of ways. I've seen people use it for license verification, negative news hits. I've seen them use it in underwriting processes. I've seen them use it in all sorts of ways. I'm not saying exclusively. I'm not saying you're using it in any illegal or weird or fuzzy ways. No impropriety, y'all. I mean, like just straight up the same tool everybody else uses has facets that I've seen them unlock and be excited by and use often. I also think it's one of the I have seen very effective targeted use by savvy startups like CROs, digging in on building already connected like name value humans. Like I'm not going to name names, but there are certain people out there who everybody goes, what do they do for a living? They find people that have cannabis subscriptions, and they use that to targetedly network their way into conversations and open doors. So I think that's my point being, it is a hellaciously effective data tool for business development. You can build a web of humans to talk to, and it gives you context, right? If you're a nerd like me.
Well, good. So, that's very helpful, and I think that sort of validates some of the stuff that we've seen with our own personas, whether it be sales and marketing, people doing research, or people doing compliance. Lots of ways to use it. Now, you're currently at Greenleaf Business Solutions, which is kind of interesting because I think when I first met you, you were at Green Check. So sort of working at two types of firms that are both heavily in the compliance space in my mind. I used to work in HR publishing and that whole area, so I'm sort of familiar a little bit with Greenleaf and even with Green Check. It's sort of like regulations within the regulated cannabis industry. What's that like? I mean, how have you found Greenleaf to be? Because it's a whole new set of rules and regs that maybe for a data nerd like you is just a heck of a lot of fun and a new place to swim around.
I think it's a lot of the same and a lot different and a lot of all of it at once. So I love Greenleaf. I've been really interested in actually unpacking it from that like cannabis banking perspective, right? So I come from this world of cannabis banking laws, and then you realize that payroll isn't a big jump, and then from payroll to HR, it's not a big jump, and it's a very linear building block process of a business. And it's actually kind of funny. I don't think I've said this to anyone out loud before. I'm going through this PhD VA, right? So I'm doing a PhD of business and then strategic marketing, right? So it's kind of like a PhD and a DBA at the same time. It's been interesting that as I've like onboarded, I was kind of going through a specific track of courses that were about like structural function of businesses and some of the key pieces that Greenleaf does every day. So it's actually been really interesting to be inundated with it from both the theoretical academic side and watching it every day with a new set of coworkers. It's been stimulating, overwhelming, exciting. I'm loving it.
Yeah. It's sort of that combination of exhilarating and exhausting all at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it's long days, long hours. Add in all of the fun for anybody who doesn't know me personally or pay attention in the world. My wife and I spend a lot of time with plants outside. It's very important to my existence to garden. I think we just counted, we have 28 different edible foods on our property or something at this point that we can do. So I don't have a lot of time, but it's worth it at the end of the day. I feel like we're making a lot of measurable change here at Greenleaf in organizations in a really fundamental way. Like I loved providing cannabis banking solutions, right? Like that's a fundamental core piece of a business. This is a step more, and something that makes Greenleaf different than anybody else I could have landed at is that they do some things that nobody else does. They do full-blown managed services, meaning I have coworkers who are acting as full-blown bolt-on departments for companies. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is unfettered access to understanding how cannabis companies operate at a fundamental human level. And then being able to unpack that to solve problems has allowed us to, I don't know, whatever, I'm going to do it. So like, we have been able to work with some very massive companies in cannabis in a very, very hands-in way on a full managed services deal, right? We can do it for big and small companies, but we've implemented it with some pretty huge names. It has been so enlightening to understand how improvement of processes, procedures, or letting a team who doesn't take days off or do any of the things that like normal doing it internally causes a company, right? It's so much easier to just let a team handle it than it is. And then watching my team do that handling, it's been, oh man, it's been really like, I don't know. I feel like I like touched that cube in the Halo TV show where he's like, and he like sees the universe or whatever happened. That is what it felt like.
Wow. So in terms of your view of the market or Greenleaf's, do you take on all comers, or sort of in looking at the suite of solutions, it's rather robust. So is it something where the larger market sizes and MSOs or big SSOs are the ones that you focus on?
So I will do that, but so I refuse to give away a trade secret here, but I will give a little bit away. So I bucket loosely off of three kind of factors, but then I'm going to explain how I use those factors in the system. So I bucket off of market maturity, size of operators, and then well, those are kind of the two main factors,
Yeah.
but then that plays into targeting by state, but groups of states, and then targeting sub by size, right? So I don't want to go too far into that because then we get into like, I got some real funky lists, and I know you can go look at how they're built, and we can talk about it. But like, I like targeting that way, right? Like I would rather think of operators from the way they operate. So I think of friends of mine like Willie McKenzie, right? He's got a cannabis operators mastermind group, right? Like they do this like hangout session where they all talk about what's going on, and they're from all different markets. So as much as we talk about that, I think there are also universal truths that come across markets and cross pollinate and all of those things. And that, right? I think this ability to come together and talk about the things and put them together in a fundamental way and help each other. And I kind of lost where I was going, but you get where I'm going with that, right? Like,
So with different markets and different backgrounds, in terms of Greenleaf, are you in all states that have cannabis, or are you just in? Okay, good.
We can also do all 50 states. So we can do all 50 states for like hemp operators that are doing legal businesses. We do have a few non-cannabis like companies, like not affiliated at all. Those are usually happenstance. I think it's no secret there are lots of people who have a hand in cannabis businesses, own a cannabis business or two, but they also own, I don't know, whatever, a real estate company or this thing or that thing. A lot of times we've picked up their other businesses, right? Their laundromats or whatever they are.
Well, how many HRISs do people want to have? One, or right?
You know what? Here's a really interesting one that goes back to the kind of managed services thread that we were on, right? Like my why and all of this, what's been kind of enlightening, what's kind of blowing my mind is the amount of companies that have had to build band-aided pieces of stuff, right? Yeah. Like there are companies out there that are using half a dozen different payrolls across 8 different things, and over here doing this and that and the thing, and it's like, you guys could do it all, and I get why. It's not their fault. Like I want to be very clear, the birth of cannabis has not been pretty, right? The birth of cannabis companies have not been pretty. It's been a very chaotic mess along the way. So they have built it kind of like putting Lego sets together, right? They're like, those guys, we like them, they kind of do business like us, let's merge, or let's build a holding company and then let's buy them, right? Like it's been that way. So it makes sense that they're there now. I think the thing with all of this kind of stuff we've been talking about, like what my path, the whole thing, kind of one thread of this is, I think we're at a new era in cannabis, right? Whether it's the academia front, like there are people graduating with bachelor's and masters in cannabis stuff. There are all of these things that are kind of signaling cannabis is growing up, right? Like we're entering a new phase where we are going to start looking more and more like real industries, and real industries have things like Greenleaf is offering, things like Green Check offered, like all of it, right? Like, so hook, line, and sinker is, I think every cannabis company is fighting a really hard fight, and let the expert vendors that are experts, like the companies I've worked with, I'll give my personal endorsement to both, let them do the hard stuff for you. And then you can do all this stuff, like focus on working on the pieces of the business that you wanted to when you got into it, right? Like touching patients' lives or building the best of this or the dankest this thing or whatever it is, like the why. Don't care.
Or focusing on your customers.
Yeah.
By outsourcing a lot of these features and functions that, maybe you shouldn't build on your own or patchwork together, et cetera. So yeah, I think that's good advice, Brett. So I'm kind of curious about the challenges that Greenleaf faces just as a business. Like, we've all heard about the likely rescheduling of cannabis and what that might mean for 280E, which essentially means cannabis tax laws get rewritten or changed. And, if you're touching as many parts of the business as a company like Greenleaf, I imagine that has implications. Maybe they're all positive. I don't know, but I would just imagine it as a guy who used to work in regulatory publishing. That's a big deal when stuff like that happens. It's all hands on deck for a long time as we sort of figure stuff out. So, pluses, minuses. What happens in terms of challenges and perhaps opportunities for Greenleaf.
So I think it's mostly opportunities, right? So I think there are some others that people aren't considering. Recent changes in 401k laws, some changes in medical health care laws and coverages and things people have to carry. So there's actually a lot of companies that are now above thresholds requiring things. So there's actually a lot of really cool changes for us already happening in expanded services in that way. So I think the tax piece, right, the 280E going away part, one of the things that gives me hope is we have an awesome network of CPAs, accountants, fractional CFOs, banking folks, data folks. We have a lot of cool people that can help cannabis companies do that. We also have, our payroll tax department's pretty stellar. We're looking forward to it, right? Basically, it removes one set of regulations and opens up another opportunity for us to expand our services in a very meaningful way. Doesn't change anything else for us, really, right? It takes a couple of compliance steps out of the way and lets us say, like, yeah, we can treat you a lot more like a normal business. Let's grow faster, bigger, better. Let's offer you more things.
That makes sense. Absolutely. I mean, it'll really be interesting to see how it impacts businesses and sort of the choices and the decisions they'll make as they, perhaps repurpose capital to other things. But it also brings up the question for me that I've been asking people on this podcast for a long time now, which is, has the industry hit bottom yet? And are we on our way back?
I think that goes back to something we've already talked about a little bit. There is no industry. There's 39 of them. And I think different things happen to different people at different times. If you want the crystal ball view, I'm willing to go a little bit down the chicken little, but there is hope path if you want to. So if Brett had to guess a magic wand and he's going to say some crazy stuff, I think the future of cannabis looks like the milk industry. And I think nobody's willing to admit it yet. And what I mean by that is a central network of outsourced processors in economically viable regions for that sort of agriculture, right? So think Appalachia, think the Green Triangle, the Emerald, Humboldt and all of them. So I think there's different, so I think it's going to look like the milk industry. I think the places where it is economically viable, right, traditional producer consumer economics, right, they're going to grow a vast majority. They will go to the centralized processing facilities, which is currently, as everyone knows in cannabis, the most capital intensive, difficult, and bottlenecked piece of the industry, which is transformation into usable products, whether that is extraction or manufacturing. That's going to end up at centralized processing facilities, just like it does now for milk, right? They use pasteurized facilities just like that, right? And then it's going to get distributed across a variety of brands to a variety of retailers, a la Kraft Foods, largest seller of cheese in North America, but they own no farms. So I think that eventually becomes, the how a bill becomes a law life cycle of cannabis gets sold, manufactured, and distributed just like any other semi-controlled substance, I hope. On the flip side of that, we could go doom and gloom and say big pharma controls all of it, and you're going to get some, I don't know, whatever, yucky, evil corporate Pfizer weed, and there's going to be some like guerrilla force of home growers steady in the mountains somewhere. We could go either way.
And hard to know. I love the milk analogy. I'd not heard it described that way before, but there's a lot to that. And we already have people with delivery licenses. They're like the milkmen from when I was a child. So maybe that'll make a continue a comeback or be in areas where it's not available now. So
I live in Virginia. And I love my weed delivery guy. Like, we have a very limited medical market, right? But I get delivery from one of those licensed operators from time to time. And this dude is awesome. They text with emojis like it's the old day. He pulls up in like a not the greatest car with like my bag with my name on it and like a black Anila tote. Like it was mind blowing compared to when I worked in cannabis retail in Florida, right?
Yeah.
Like where our delivery vehicles are like these unmarked white cars with up armoring and like an armored passenger guy and 8 cameras and right, like wild.
Amazing. So one last question I got, and I'm trying not to use the word industry here, so I'll see if I can figure out a better way. But I've been at a lot of conferences lately, and there's this discussion of hemp versus cannabis. I think you've posted on it as well. And some people say, is it one industry or two? As one person said from the podium, I've heard her say this twice, we are simply the cannabinoid industry. Hard stop. What do you think, Brett?
I think there's truth to every angle in this, and I think there's some nuance here. If you want to, like, let's use fun business guy language, right? So if we're at 100,000 feet, like we're way up there,
Right.
We're all in this together, right? All of us are trying to sell a plant to people that will change their mind, right? In some way, whether it's to get them high or to make them feel better or whatever. Like we are all essentially in the larger, I don't know, whatever, entheogen plant medicine world. There's no secret. There's crossover with magic mushroom people, LSD people, and like, right, whatever. Like, so we're all in that greater ecosystem. You could even, I think, argue from a if we should work together stance, we could hang out with the nutraceutical people a little more often. So, 100,000 foot view. Yeah, we're all in it together, right?
Right.
I think if you get all the way down to the very minuscule, like, point of detail you see like the scientists and real sticklers for regulations get to, no, there is a very distinct set of legislature that makes it two different everythings, right? One is super ultra siloed mega hard mode. The other one is unregulated wild west of early California, early Maine cannabis legalization days done at a national scale. I think there are a lot of really solid operators that have exploited the hemp market to do some really cool things, right? They are quality operations that will one day hopefully have cannabis licenses and whatever. There's also a lot of charlatans that sell bathtub gin washed, acid washed yucky stuff in gas stations. So I think there are distinctions. I think the problem is that no one's willing to come to the table and say like, hey, maybe everybody has a place, right? So like my take is I guess a little controversial in that I think that the minor cannabinoids that are non-intoxicating, please nobody jump on the like intoxicating's a subjective word and blah 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 DSM criteria stuff. I'm down to have that argument, but let's not do it on the airport stuff. It'll be terrible, and it's really boring and dry. However, so if it's intoxicating, or if it requires acids, and I don't mean acid in the chemistry sense. I understand acid is a relevant term. I mean like hydrochloric acid, like, palladium catalysts, like that sort of stuff. I think we need to bring that into the regulated markets, wherever it is. And if it's existing in a state that doesn't have one, you have a regulatory hurdle in your hands that can force legislature from the bench to figure out what to do.
Right.
Because they cannot make what was legal yesterday illegal in that way. Like they can. Obviously, there are many loopholes, but there's some legal fight here. And I think public sentiment, they would lose in the end. So if you got deep enough pockets and, whatever. But you get what I'm saying, right? So yes and no, they are the same, different. I think we bring them regulated market. I think the non-intoxicating stuff give it to me my mail, man. My wife gets CBN for sleep every night, and that doesn't need to be packaged like it's Fort Knox to get out. Like, if a kid drank the whole bottle, the worst thing they're gonna do is go, "Mom, I'm sleepy," and they're done for a night, and you're cool. Like, I'm not a doctor. That's not medical advice. None of that. But you get what I'm saying.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Brett, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and taking us on that journey from bong to boardroom and beyond. And really appreciate your insights and thoughts about everything, including cannabis media. So thank you so much. And I'll look forward to seeing you at an upcoming industry show before long.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.